back to my channel where I'm going to share with you all my tips and tricks as a pre-med, a med school applicant, and eventually as a med student. I'm Giovanna, and in today's video, you're going to learn about how I made my med school list. So first off, I want to make the disclaimer that there are so many ways people go about making their med school lists. Some people like to choose a certain number of schools from each tier based on either the prestige of the school or how their stats compare to the stats of a school's accepted applicants from previous years. Well, I took a really different approach than this when making a list, and some people could argue that I took more of a risky approach than a strategic one. But my ultimate goal for my list was to make sure that I'd end up someplace where I'd be happy. My first step was making sure to apply to most of my state schools. This was the most strategic step I took because I know that state schools like to focus on in-state applicants, which gives them an extra edge. But also, in-state schools are often cheaper than out-of-state schools and private schools. Well, being a New York resident, I had lots of options, so I applied to 3 of the 4 in-state schools. And I also applied to NYU, because why the heck not? Did I ever think that I would get in? No. Did I get in? No. So now that I had all my in-state schools on my list, my next step was to choose schools that were out-of-state in locations where I'd want to live. I really wanted to live somewhere warmer than upstate New York, where I'd been living for the past few years. Being from Brazil, when I say warmer, I'm talking about like Texas or Florida warm. So I added most of the Texas state schools since they were within the climate that I'd want to live in, and they have insanely low tuition costs. And if you check out my video on the cost of applying to med school, you'll see that it was worth it to apply to all of those Texas schools anyway, because it's just one low application fee for all of the schools combined. I also lived in Texas for 60 years! I also lived in Texas for 6 years, and I really enjoyed it. Then for Florida, I looked at MSAR, which by the way is a really valuable tool for you to be able to get all the nitty-gritty information on a school and their stats. I applied to 1 private Florida school and a couple of their state schools in which out-of-state applicants could realistically even stand a chance. If I saw on MSAR that a school was interviewing only a handful of out-of-state applicants and the entering class was like 98% in-state, then I wasn't going to bother applying there. Then, one of the most important things I did while making my med school list was talking to people around me. I asked friends who had interviewed the past cycle what they thought about a school, I asked mentors and professors if they heard good things from their students about a school, and I also asked advisors for their insight. For me, one of the most valuable conversations I had while making my list was when I went up to an advisor and said to him that the number one thing that I was looking for in a school was a non-competitive and supportive environment. Being an advisor who works with pre-med students of diverse backgrounds, he went on to give me a list of schools where his students have ended up at and that they love. I added most of those schools to my list, and the school that I'm going to is actually one of those schools from my advisor's list. Next, I applied to a couple of schools that offer 3-year programs with conditional acceptance to a residency of my choice. Because I knew so early on in my life that my passions were in obstetrics and gynecology, I felt comfortable applying to these schools and programs, knowing that if I were to be accepted, I'd go on to do a residency in OBGYN. And that's a huge commitment at this point in our journeys. So if you're like me and you've had a passion for a particular field in medicine for a while, then this might also be a good consideration for you. So you might be thinking, did she just completely discount her MCAT scores in picking schools? Or did she have like a 528 and it didn't really matter? No, my MCAT score was not the best. I was really trusting in the holistic review process, and that admissions committees would see that the rest of my application throughout my 3.5 years of undergrad was good, but that I did take my MCAT during a really difficult time in my life. However, that doesn't mean that I completely ignored the MCAT when picking schools. I chose not to apply to schools that have insanely high median MCAT scores for accepted applicants, in which I wasn't even in the 10th percentile. I also chose not to apply to schools with jaw-dropping tuition rates since, although I've accepted my fate of living in perpetual debt for the next many years, I did feel particularly overwhelmed by those numbers. So to recap, the main factors that I considered when making my med school list were in-state status, location, as well as recommendations from people I trust. With all the schools that I ended up applying to, I made sure to research the heck out of them so I could start getting a feel for their community. Like I said before, having a supportive and caring community of students, faculty, and staff was the number one thing I was looking for in a school. And if for some reason I didn't get that vibe from them, I trusted my intuition and removed them from my list. Remember that your list really is so personal to you. Ultimately, I figured out what my priorities were and stayed true to that when making my list. So I'd suggest you prioritize which factors are most important to you and use those factors when considering which schools you'd like to apply to. I hope you find this video helpful when making or refining your own medical school list. As always, please comment below if you have any questions, and please make sure to subscribe to my channel for more videos. Bye everyone!